You brought up an interesting point, Wendy. We're at some inflection points, one being the 2024 Bitcoin halving cycle, which also coincides with the presidential elections coming up. And
Yeah.
another point I want you to elaborate a little further on, you talked about, the central banks, and I'm looking at an article right here from the Wall Street Journal. The UN calls out the Fed, other central banks to
Mm-hmm.
halt interest rate increases. Could you elaborate? What are your thoughts on that?
So basically, the UN is saying federal, and also to you guys, one of the things to know, a lot of the headlines, a lot of it's BS. A lot of it's sources of sources of sources, and he said, she said, whatever it is. So a lot of it is complete BS. So don't just read the headline. And a lot of the information in the articles are a bunch of BS. So what I recommend you do, read the headline, read the articles, listen to different people, but search for sources. Search for different sources, look at a blue perspective, look at a red perspective, look at somebody that's down the middle, look at all these different sources, continue to educate yourself, and then make a decision. Yes, the Federal Reserve is absolutely out of control when it comes to printing money because they think printing money is going to solve the problem. When in reality, I personally think lowering taxes is going to solve the problem. And this even goes for corporations, and people are going to be mad at me for saying this. Guess what? I love capitalism. I love capitalism for the small guys. When it comes to the corporate capitalism, I got a little bit of problems there. But at the same time, we have these big companies. They're the ones that do the hiring. If they are being taxed heavily, how could they hire more people? If the middle class is being taxed heavily, how can they spend money? If the rich people are being taxed heavily, how can they spend their money? How can they create jobs? How can they do these types of things? So I think a lot of the problem is a lot of the tax rates. I think a lot of the problem is these, like Los Angeles County has got a lot of problems. The current people in office aren't doing a really good job. We need to kind of reset that a little bit because we're going to have a global reset anyways. So there's a lot of problematic behavior happening, but raising interest rates, that's good for the banks. It's not good for us. So there's a lot of problematic behavior happening. And I think allowing people to keep more of their money or saying, you know what? I would love to see them restructure taxes. And this way, I would love to hear them say, you have to pay, instead of paying 50% of your taxes, because that's really kind of what we pay at this point, you pay 10%. Then you have to pick where you want your money to go to. And they give housing, water, trash, public servants, community centers, healthcare, and you get to pick where you want to put your money. How cool would that be? I know that's not going to solve the problem, but it just was a nice delusional thought I had.
No, I think, again, I think you're pretty on the mark with a lot of that, Wendy. And I guess the way I interpret it is that our government and our Fed doesn't exactly have a revenue problem. It has a spending problem. So
like today, they send a bunch more money overseas, and I get it. But at the same time, when we don't have clean drinking water in some places for Americans, that's an MF problem. That's going to be a problematic thing for me that I'm not happy about. We should not have, like, obviously there's going to be cases of poverty because sometimes mental illness, there's extenuating circumstances, but our people are not doing okay. America is not a superpower like it used to be. I live in California, live in LA County, born and bred here. Okay. So I've been here. And to all the people, before y'all say this, because everybody says this, well, if you don't like the politics there so much, move. No, I'm not going to move, because guess what? Part of the reason why we're in the state that we're in is because we get these transplants that come here that bring their BS here. The people from the streets, they don't want none of these policies. I don't even know how these policies are getting through. So realistically, what needs to happen, don't be coming bringing your BS here. Don't be telling me how to live my life. And the people that are in power, they need to go. There needs to be term limits. That's part of the problematic behavior.
That is. So, it's funny. I actually have asked different guests about that as far as term limits. What are your thoughts on why that, these politicians or certain positions don't have term limits? Is there any specific...
Networking. So what happens is, and I know this for a fact because my daughter's father is an electrical contractor. If you want to get a bid for a school, to build a highway, to do whatever, any type of government contract, there's like 5 different contractors they picked from, 5 of them. Okay. About that, maybe a little more. So basically what happens is he could submit a bid. He's not going to get picked. So even though it's going to cost $1 million to make this bridge, they're going to actually give the contract to somebody else who's going to be charging $5 million instead of giving it to my daughter's father. because it's about the network. So it turns into a vicious cycle. What ends up happening is these people get put into office. They have friends and family that they allow them to do their work, or they do all these different things. Everybody's making money. So they keep taking that money and putting it up to help fund their campaigns, et cetera. And it just keeps repeating and repeating and repeating and repeating. And Americans are so scared of change. They're so scared of acting like, are taking responsibility for their own actions. They just let this stuff continue to happen.
Yeah, and I thought something else. And again, guys, I've been in California one time in my life, so I'm not speaking as my expert on California
it's a mess
politics.
here. It's a mess here. Yeah. But the people from the streets, we're tired of it. We don't want it. We don't want it. Even in the hood, we don't want it.
Yeah, yeah, and I definitely sympathize, because when I went there, I see how beautiful and how much potential California has. And an article I was actually reading was saying that residents from California are moving to Mexico for a lower cost of living and commuting to California. And I'm like, how is this happening in America? Like, that is the craziest thing I've ever saw.